Hi friends, today I'm going to tell you how I cured my hives with GHK. A short disclaimer. Urticaria. So let us first know the definition of this word urticaria. In Hindi, it is called sheath pit or pitti. In English, urticaria, also known as hives or nettle rash, is a skin rash with red or flesh colored raisy itchy bumps. Hives may burn or sting. The patches of rash may appear on different body parts with variable duration from minutes to days. They typically do not leave any long lasting skin change. To understand the word urtica, we have to understand the word nettle. Nettle is a common herbaceous plant known for its stinging hairs that cause a painful or burning rash on contact. The Latin word for burn is urare and the Latin word for nettle is urtica, and from this word is derived our word urticaria. Now complaints. So the case is about me. I was suffering from urticaria for 6 years. What happened? Every year my urticaria would begin with the winters and it would last through the season. During this, itchy red welts would randomly appear on my skin at various times during the day. What is the organ which is affected? The organ which is affected is epidermis and the embryonic germ layer is ectoderm. So first, before we explore how I was able to resolve, we have to understand the GHK perspective of a disease. For GHK, the diseases are not illnesses or diseases are not something which is bad. GHK considers all disease to be significant biological special programs or in short SBS. They are also meaningful biological program or purposeful biological programs. That is, the biology, the nature has certain purpose for their occurrence, and the purpose is to increase an individual's chances of survival in a perceived adversity. So, what is the biological conflict of epidermis as per GHK? The biological conflict related to epidermis is separation conflict. So, upper epidermis is the topmost layer of our skin. The top layer of our skin is sensitive to touch. So, this conflict, the biological conflict which is related to touch, closeness, is experienced in two ways. First, loss of a physical contact. Certain loss that I do not want to happen in my life. Certain physical distancing that I do not like or I abhor, detest. That loss of a physical contact. Or in just opposite of it, wanting to separate from someone or something that I dislike. I dislike something that I am in contact with and I want to separate from that unpleasant experience. And our subconscious mind does not distinguishes between the actual experience or a perceived experience or an imagined experience. So if we imagine an experience, our subconscious feels that this experience is actually happening in the real world. So can we know the source of conflict from the location of rash in someone's body. What does this mean? If some person presents rash on a particular part of his body, GHK can determine the kind of separation conflict that person has been facing, experiencing in his life. It is called localized conflict. For example, in the top right photograph, you see a person with rash on the interior side of her arms, inner side of her arms. What does this mean? This means an unwanted separation, that is, not being able or allowed to embrace or hold a beloved person or a pet. Typically, it presents as a rash on the inside of the arms, hands, fingers, or legs. And on the contrary, if someone wants to separate from a person, it affects predominantly the outside of the arms, hands, elbows, legs, knees, shin bones, or ankles used. That is, figuratively, to push or kick someone away. Some more about localized conflicts. Depending on the exact conflict situation, localized skin rashes also appear on head, face, lips, chest, external genitals, belly, toes and feet, back. Conflict with a keyboard or a musical instrument will produce rashes in hands. Urine incontinence or wet diapers will produce rashes around genitals. There is something called generalized conflict. A widespread skin rash reveals a generalized separation conflict suffered by a person as a whole. Now, as we understood, the biological conflict related to the epidermis is a separation conflict experienced in two ways. One of that way was loss of a physical contact. So we will see many examples how loss of a physical contact is manifested as a separation conflict on a skin epidermis of a person. In this example, for an infant, the mother is the most important attachment figure. She protects her child and can prevent conflicts. Hence, if a child presents skin manifestations, there is a possibility of the loss, absence, or non availability of the mother at the time of conflict. That means when the actual conflict occurred, when the actual separation conflict triggered, the mother was not available for the child. Newborns suffer the conflict when they are separated from their mothers at birth. For example, putting an infant in an incubator or putting an infant in the phototherapy or giving an infant for an adoption. Separation conflict can already occur intrauterine, for example, because of ultrasound procedures. The ultrasound noise drowns out the mother's heartbeat, which can be highly traumatic for the fetus. Each ultrasound test triggers conflict relapse for the unborn. The baby cannot hear her mother's heartbeat when ultrasound noise is around. Children also experience separation conflicts in many ways. For example, scolded, punished, or abused. For example, when a new sibling is born and that new sibling is given extra importance than the child. or for example, when parents split or when parents fight. If there are a lot of fight amongst the parents, the child feels separation conflict. Or even if parents are mulling a divorce, or when a child is not allowed to see his friends, classmates, or when a child is separated from his favorite toy or a doll, or when a child is separated from a pet, or when a child has a working mom, each day the child sees his mom going away, or when the child is put in daycare or kindergarten, or when a child is taken care by babysitter or a nanny. The elderly also feel separated from the pack. For example, when a senior is moved into a nursing home or an old age home, or when a person faces death of a spouse. The loss of physical contact can also be experienced when there is a fear of losing touch or contact with someone. For example, threat of a divorce or a difficult long distance relationship or a difficult weekend relationship or a fear that a loved one might leave or a fear that one's loved one might die. Pets also suffer separation conflict. For example, when their master leaves or dies, or when they are put in a kennel or a pet hostel. Loss of a physical contact can also be experienced when one is not allowed or when one is not able to touch something. For example, musical instrument, keyboard, tennis racket, or a steering wheel. When one is no longer allowed or able to feel on the skin his favorite pillow or the engagement ring or his favorite shoes. Now, we also understood that separation conflict can also experienced when someone wants to separate from someone or something. So, for example, wanting to separate from but unable to push away a terrorizing boss, a terrorizing teacher, annoying colleague, annoying schoolmate, abusive parent, or an abusive spouse. Wanting to separate from something which is close to skin. That is, I do not want this item to be touching my skin. I hate a face mask, an oxygen mask, a helmet, a hat, a piece of cloth. Children do not want to wear certain piece of cloth that their parents buy. And when the parents push them to wear those clothes, they may suffer separation conflict. Or when someone is forced to wear some shoes, a pair of shoes, tight stockings. I remember in my school days, one of my classmates, when we were very young, probably third or fourth grader, the classmate was allergic to the socks that were part of our school uniform. Therefore, he came with a special application from the doctor that he be allowed to wear medicated socks. A person can feel separation conflict when he is having wet clothes, his clothes are wet, or a child or a senior citizen, wet diapers. Now, as we understood in the early part of my presentation, that GHK terms any disease as a meaningful, purposeful biological program or special biological program. So, any so-called disease in GHK terms follows two phases of biological special program. As you can see in this photograph, there is a conflict active phase and a healing phase. If you can see two triangles, one triangle is DHS. DHS means the moment when a person experienced certain conflict. From that first triangle, which is DHS in this photograph, until CL, which is conflictolysis, that is when conflict was resolved. So between this phase, from the beginning of the conflict to the resolution of the conflict, is called conflict active phase. And when the conflict is resolved, it is called the healing phase, the phase where a person or an individual is in healing. So, in case of epidermis, the conflict active phase, a person will feel hypothesia, numbness, and in the healing phase, a person will feel hyperthesia. And in the healing phase, a person, an individual will experience hypersensitivity. So now let us understand the conflict active phase of a epidermis. During the conflict active phase, the epidermis ulcerates at the area associated with the separation. The ulcerations are microscopic and usually go unnoticed. People do not realize the moment when separation conflict began. With the ongoing conflict activity, however, the skin becomes dry, rough, flaky, pale, and cold due to poor blood circulation. That is, when a person is not able to resolve the conflict for a long time, the skin will become dry, rough, flaky, pale, and cold. Now, what is the biological purpose? So we remember that every so-called disease is actually a special biological program by nature. So in this case of epidermis, what is the biological purpose of the nature? Because of the loss of epidermal cells, the skin's sensitivity decreases. If the separation conflict is severe, severe means if the separation conflict is long lasting or the content of the conflict is of a very high magnitude, the skin can become completely numb, which is called sensory paralysis. A typical symptom of the conflict active phase is short-term memory loss, which serves the purpose to temporarily forget the one who was torn from the skin, who was taken away by blocking out the memory. In animal world, a animal can no longer recognize her offspring when they are separated from her too early. Short-term memory loss persists into the early phase of healing. Now let us understand the healing phase. During the first part of healing phase, which is in this diagram PCLA, the ulcerated area of the skin is replenished through cell proliferation. That is, the cell which were ulcerated during the conflict active phase will now multiply in conflict healing phase. The skin swells up, becomes red, inflamed, irritated, itchy, and sensitive to touch. That is hypersensitivity. You remember the conflict active phase was hyposensitive. and conflict healing phase is hypersensitive. The small fluid-filled edemas appear as blisters. After the epileptoid crisis in PCLB, that is post-conflictolysis stage B, the blisters dry up and the skin normalizes, provided there are no conflict relapses. The healing of the skin manifests as a skin rash. So here all the so-called diseases of epidermis will be manifested, including dermatitis, eczema, hives or urticaria, which I was suffering from, measles, rubella, chickenpox, rosacea, lupus, psoriasis, herpes and so on. Based on GHK, it is all the same. That is, there is no difference between hives, measles, rubella, etc. They are all the healing phase of a separation conflict. Now, how did I understood my conflict? Through GHK. You remember in the beginning, in my introduction, I mentioned that my hives were always triggered during the onset of winters. So this is the conflict which was decoded. I always hated winter. I would count the days until the entire winters got over. I would often wear extra winter clothing, extra layers to take precautions to stay warm. Now my psyche saw this winter as an unpleasant touch on my skin, and each fear re-triggered that conflict cycle. During a conversation very recently with my GHK mentor Dr. C.J. Varghese, I learned that my separation conflict is wanting to separate from winter cold air touching my skin. He also said that when urticaria lasts for years, GHK may link it to an attack conflict which is associated with dermis layer. Now that is for another presentation. Some other day I may also present the attack conflict in which dermis layer or corium skin is involved. How I resolved my separation conflict. So I decided to resolve this by welcoming winter instead of resisting it. I began letting my body experience cold weather without any fear. I also began taking cold showers to face my fears of cold steadily. What was the result? The more I worked on resolving my fear and resistance to winter, the more urticaria diminished. This is because I have resolved the biggest trigger of my separation conflict, which was animosity with winters and the unpleasantness of the touch of cold air on my skin. As I was resolving this conflict, my urticaria began to steadily reduce from the moment of the counseling. Today, it has been around 2 months since my counseling and my urticaria is almost cured. From constant occurrence throughout the winter days, it has come down to only once or twice a week, and that too with a very less intensity. Today, I am confident to resolve the leftover tracks of my separate conflict very soon. In the end, I would like to thank Dr. Hammer for his groundbreaking medical discovery that freed humanity from the fear of diseases. The credit for all the scientific images and the knowledge of GNM to the website learninggnm.com. And finally, thanks to Dr. Varghese and Global GHK team for spreading this knowledge to the world. For more information, follow the link globalgnm.com. Thank you.